get the show on the road.
Anyway, Sue, thank you very much for coming on. So, one thing that I suppose that always kind of interests me is how so many powerlifters come from like kind of failed sporting backgrounds, right? Um, but that's not everybody. And like, there's a kind of a bit of a meme in powerlifting in regards to like specificity and people starting getting into powerlifting and almost like going too far down that route without necessarily kind of
Mhm.
building up some level of athletic ability. Whereas you talk about a lot about that, and I know you have a big background with like playing rugby to a high level. So,
Yeah.
could you tell us a bit about your kind of journey to date in regards to getting to the position you're in at the moment with both powerlifting and coaching powerlifters too, and kind of how your kind of process of athletic development has helped you in regards to coaching?
Yeah. So I mean, so I initially played college football at the University of Ottawa, and then I ended up playing 2 years of college rugby as well, and I was the captain of the men's team. And for me, it very quickly became apparent to me that the practice field is where you actually practice the sport, and then the much more general qualities that we want to develop, i.e., strength, whatever, is going to come in the weight room. And you know, it's weird for me coming from a collegiate strength or collegiate sports and strength and conditioning background that so many people in powerlifting are like consumed with doing really, really general, kind of nonsensical things from a programming perspective in the hopes to develop some modicum of athleticism. Because there is this undercurrent of specificity that you both know is absolutely crucial to being an effective powerlifter, right? Like you need to know how to squat, you need to know how to bench press, you need to know how to deadlift, and if we want to develop these other qualities, whether it's speed or whatever that may be, there should still be that undercurrent of specificity when we're doing those things. And if we want to train more general qualities, we likely shouldn't be doing that with the barbell. And we need to ask ourselves from a needs analysis perspective with the athlete, is that actually something they need? Right. So I think what a lot of coaches make the mistake of is they see someone who's successful and say, well, they do this, so I should probably do this. And the reality of the situation is, if you're pretty unathletic, learning how to move better in space is going to make you a better powerlifter. If you already have a requisite base of athletic capacity, you probably just need to get better at the sport. So if you have someone who's completely motor retarded and they can't move well, then yeah, it's absolutely crucial that you get them to learn how to hinge, get them to learn how to move on one leg, get them to learn how to move their shoulder blades in space. Like all these things are really, really crucial. But most people who've played any kind of high level sport already have that requisite capacity. And if they don't, it's very easy to teach it to them because you just explain it to them in the context of the sport that they played. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's, when we're looking at developing these other qualities and looking at developing athleticism as a powerlifter, it should also be with the idea that you are a barbell athlete. So developing that athleticism also has to take into account using a barbell.
Yeah.
For
Go on.
sorry, Shane, go on ahead, man.
No, you go. You go.
For you, Stuart, what kind of things are you using to define athleticism? Because I suppose it's very easy to kind of have an abstraction of what an athlete is or what an athlete does, because you can take that and you can stratify that out to, okay, I'm going to start doing 6 foot fucking drop jumps, or I'm going to like, and I actually really, really agree with a lot of the principles you kind of said there, whereas it's not to go down the route of FMS where, okay, your overhead squat is a one, we want to bring that up to three. I think you're making a very valid point is that a lot of people now who are starting powerlifting have no background in sports, no background in lifting. And I think where you're kind of saying there's an awful lot of validity to even in the conditioning of the other tissues outside of muscle. I mean, like you have people um, that I've seen come into powerlifting and they probably have their tendons aren't developed in the way that if they had that previous strength and conditioning exposure through plyometrics, through sprinting, through more high velocity movements, they probably would have some of those adaptations already carried into the sport.
Yeah.
And I think from a technique perspective, I think I would definitely agree with you on the hinge. Probably if someone has learned to hinge really early on, and they've exposure to weightlifting or kind of triple extension movements, powerlifting it's a walk in the park in comparison to what's out there.
Yeah, and it's the idea behind it too is like when we're defining a barbell athlete, which is a bit of a misnomer, right? Um, it just comes down to being able to maximally display the sport skill, which in this case of powerlifting is a 1 rep max in the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. So when we're talking about developing these athletic qualities, like it's one fucking quality that you have to develop, right? It's not all of these other qualities. Like, we know with the concurrent approach, we know with the conjugate approach that we can train multiple qualities at the same time. We can have benefit through training multiple qualities at the same time. But I think people got so consumed with the like, I need to be an athlete to be a good powerlifter. It's like, you actually don't. And a lot of the best powerlifters I know are pretty fucking unathletic. And there are some good powerlifters who are also very athletic, but that's the exception, not the norm, right? It's like, I don't think Jesus Oliveira has a 36-inch box jump. So it's like, we might be missing the forest for the trees here. And, I think movement variability is a really, really great way to have an athlete be in less pain. I think movement variability is a really, really great way to, kind of backfill against these inadequacies in the natural progression of a powerlifting program. But I don't think consuming ourselves with developing these athletic qualities is going to lead to the best long-term success in powerlifting.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think where, like I would coach a lot of like beginner powerlifters, and I think one of the things I like to have in there from, I suppose, kind of like for people that are earlier into the sport, kind of develop, like it's easy to get someone, not easy, but I suppose it's relatively easy for someone to get stronger, especially when they're quite new in the sport. I think long term, I think from, and I suppose it's maybe a dirty word or a phrase, dirty phrase that I don't really like using, but maybe from an injury prevention. But I think having some slower tempo work in there to develop some tendon stiffness. I think having some low kind of low SSC plyometrics are probably worthwhile having in there. I think having some kind of stuff that's going to develop the tendon complex, I suppose, maybe outside of their barbell work, I think is usually kind of generally worthwhile. But I think it's like you said, it's the more advanced someone becomes, I think they can kind of step away from an awful lot of that kind of stuff, and the need for athleticism kind of decreases. Where you take the upper echelons of the sport, I really doubt Jesus Olivares or Dan Bell or Evie Corrigan or any of these. I don't imagine they're too worried about their athleticism.
Well, and that's just it, right? So it's like we need to think about it as like the newer an athlete is, likely the more general the training can be and still yield results. But the more advanced an athlete is, the more specific the training must become in order to continue yielding those same results, right? You look at, easiest way to see that progression is you look at Shako's beginner programs, and then you look at Shako's, master in sport international class program, and the specificity ramps up super fucking hard, and the intensity ramps up super hard, the frequency drops, and so, we know kind of like with how Andre Milanichev trains, with how Dan Bell trains, with how Jesus Oliveira trains, it's all kind of the same shit. And it's all very, very similar. It's all very, very consistent. And it's almost like because we saw one or two people who compete at a high level do a plyometric, we're like, well, that must be the secret. It's like, okay, you're doing box jumps and med ball slams in the sagittal plane, which is already the fucking plane that you train in. It's probably not helping anything. And in actuality, there's no way to even tell if that's what's working, right? Like, we know that there's plenty of high-level powerlifters who don't do any of that and can still compete at a high level. So to say that, like, that's the golden bullet, so to speak, is, like, I think a little bit intellectually dishonest.
Yeah, 100%. What kind of, I suppose, maybe a segue into that, do you think there is any, like, do you think yourself there's any point to a powerlifter using some plyos, or have you ever used them in your own training with any of your athletes?
Yeah. So, and I think, and this is where it this is where I think I differ from a fair amount of people, is that I think plyometrics for most people, like you coach beginner powerlifters, Shane, I'm sure you coach beginner powerlifters as well. How many people do you know coming in can even safely perform a fucking box jump?
Mm.
Very
I don't,
few.
I mean, maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 12, right? So it's like, and then we have to think about it from the concept of training economy, right? Which is like, okay, we're going to devote a lion's share of this person's mental capacity to get them to learn this movement that doesn't really have a super high degree of carryover, but wants to train this general quality that we can train. Or we can give them something constrained by the barbell that trains the similar or the exact same quality,
Mm.
right? And it's like, okay, it's like, what about dynamic effort work? What about just moving fast with the bar on your back? And that definitely has a higher degree of specificity than jumping onto a box or throwing a med ball. And, you look at good example. I did an entire off season of compensatory acceleration training, right? So I started at like 55% of my 1 rep max in a meet. And I did a 5x5, and it was 3 minutes for the set and rest week 1, 2.5 minutes for set and rest week 2, 2 minutes for set and rest week 3, deload week 4, add 5% the next wave. So I think the heaviest I got, I did a 65% of my 1 rep max for a 5x5 high bar beltless in like 10 minutes. And every single one of those reps was really, really intense because the idea behind compensatory acceleration is you're accelerating through 100% of the movement. And I squatted a PR in competition. I squatted 325 kilos in sleeves in the next meet, and that was a 148-pound sleeves PR. So we can still train those qualities using the constraint of the barbell. And I think this is what a lot of people forget, right? Is like, you can also just move fast with the bar. And in fact, moving fast with the bar is definitely going to have direct carryover because at worst, it's technique work, but at best, it's technique work and the plyometric or speed component that we're trying to train as well.
No, you're after kind of echoing kind of a lot of my thought process behind variations that we do. Like the comp lifts are the comp lifts. They're there because you're a fucking powerlifter and you have to do some powerlifting lifts. But I think a lot of the time people have this idea that pause squats, okay, a pause squat is going to do this one job. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like your variations can tick multiple boxes at the same time. Like if we add in a pause squat, it can maybe teach you some positioning into the hole. It can maybe take out some of that elastic energy stored up in your tendons. It can also maybe help you with your technique. Like you said there with maybe some of that again, like people kind of scoff at it like speed work now, but I think where a lot of the earlier conjugate training, especially with stronger lifters, I find the guys that can only maybe deadlift once every 10 days, if I'm trying to get some worthwhile volume into them, and we know an awful lot of the adaptations, or maybe when we get the best adaptations from lower intensity or lower relative percentage strength training, is when it's done with maximal acceleration, maximal intent. We do see neurological adaptations from those kinds of lifts, and that's where I think when people look at like a 5x2 in their program with maybe a, I don't know, 50-60% of their load, they're like, oh, that's speed work. And it's like it's not just doing that one thing. In the same way when they have a tempo squat, it's like, okay, it might be reinforcing a bit of positioning, it might be maybe dropping down the overall training load, we might be maybe training some tendons here as well. But no, I really like just the way you put it there, that it's not just doing one thing, it might be doing a whole bunch of things for us at the same time.
Yeah, they can also just be serving as like a bridge to your main day as well. Like, not every day within your training week has to be pushed equally, right?
Mm.
Especially
Yeah.
depending on certain phases of training that you're in. Like, if you're coming up to a competition, it's unlikely that you're going to be pushing every single day of training. And again, some of those days are just essentially give you a little bit of a break until you get to your competition day, and then you push that.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly how my training is organized as well, right? Which is that my dynamic effort upper and my dynamic effort lower on Monday and Wednesday, and then my dynamic effort upper and lower, or sorry, max effort upper and lower is on Friday and Sunday. So it's like the temporal association between those two is that I practice the skill with a really relatively high degree of specificity on those dynamic effort days, because in actuality, aside from, let's say, a little bit of band tension and maybe a little bit less weight, it's 1 or 2 reps, which is definitely pretty specific, and it's on the competition movement, which is definitely pretty specific.
Yeah.
And so then I have that exposure, and then I have a temporal association around it, 3 or 4 days. And then I have my max effort exposure, which is, for me, cycles between squats and deadlifts, but I do squats and deadlifts every dynamic effort day. And so, it's just like, it's really, really odd to me where there's kind of 2 cohorts, right? So there's the tested side and the untested side. So the tested side doesn't want to do anything, on average, will not want to do anything that's not squat, bench press, and deadlift to improve the squat, bench press, and deadlift. And the untested side would be the absolute opposite, which is they want to do everything but the squat, bench press, and deadlift to improve the
deadlift. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think I suppose it's like most things, it's somewhere in the middle. It's kind of a hard. What I find myself definitely is for the guys that compete in reps. They're the guys that are like, okay, so we're going to be banging out these good mornings and RDLs, and it's the guys that maybe compete in the IPF a lot are like, why am I not deadlifting 4 times a week? And you're trying to be like, can we both be friends here?
Yeah.
I do think though, and I suppose you can maybe attest to this as well, there is within untested powerlifting and within tested powerlifting, there are almost memes that exist. And I suppose in a lot of tested powerlifting spheres, or even a lot of people I coach, it's kind of, there's an assumption that you need to have pretty high frequency, train a lift maybe at a minimum of 3 times per week, whereas nearly in the untested side, it is nearly at the opposite end, where they probably lack specificity. I find when I am looking at a lot of guys' programs, you could probably squeeze in 1 extra competition lift in there, maybe in a 2-week cycle or maybe a 3-week cycle.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to, I think there tends to be a fundamental misunderstanding of what anabolic steroids do to the body, especially on the untested side, right? So in actuality, they do improve recovery, and that that far and away across all spheres, they improve recovery. Now, for some reason, they've extrapolated that out, be like, okay, well, muscle is growing faster than tendons, so I should limit the loading of the tendons so that I don't hurt myself. When in actuality, it's like, do you not think that that's part of the issue? Like, do you not think that like consistently training at low average intensities is part of the reason why you're predisposing yourself to injury? Yeah. It's like if you were playing rugby and you waited until your first rugby game to ever sprint. Why would that work? It's like, oh, I pulled my hamstring. Well, no fucking shit, dude. You haven't run until today.
Yeah.
It's like, the one thing that I do think the, conjugate approach, the max effort dynamic effort split approach gives untested powerlifting is consistent exposure to maximal or near maximal loads on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
And I think that you can do that in untested powerlifting. You just need to make sure that the rest of the program has a bit of a backfill, to work on tendon capacity, to work on all these other qualities that we may be lacking. And I think because people can get away with less in untested powerlifting, just simply as a byproduct of each rep is more fatiguing, each rep is more stimulating, they think that, well, that just must be what I have to do, and I can only bench heavy every 10 days because Josh Bryant benches once every 10 days or once every 14 days with Julius Maddox. It's like he benches 800 fucking pounds. You bench 365. You could probably bench more.
Yeah. No, we were actually talking to John Jewett on an episode there recently, and it was one of the things that I kind of in my own experience with untested lifting is like tendinopathies. How many people do we know, they go into a comp, oh, my pec is fucking killing me, what do they do? Grade 1 or grade 2 tear, if not a full-blown rupture. And these tendon tears or ruptures or avulsions are far more common in the untested side than the tested side. And I think you kind of highlighted a couple of things there where they're not getting the specificity of the movements often enough. I think a lot of the time as well, you'll have this thing of people maybe overloading through wraps, maybe through equipment, and their muscle is strong enough, but the tendon complex just isn't loaded heavy enough or often enough. And then finally, then, like you said there, where obviously there's a fair body of research regarding anabolics impacts on tendons, bone density, any of these kinds of things that I think a lot of people just kind of disregard. And it's probably not taken into account within the training that you probably do need to actively train your tendons as well, through isometrics, maybe through some heavy, slow eccentrics. It's not to say that that they will guarantee that you're going to be injury free or pain free, but I think the risk to reward ratio of keeping those kinds of movements and activities in is probably worthwhile on the untested side, because like you said there, the adaptations that you're getting from anabolics, depending on what you're taking, will primarily be on muscle size. That's probably a lot of what you're getting, and recovery with that. So like, I mean, if you look at, if it's constantly, if you've a higher rate of muscle protein synthesis, you probably have more muscle size, you probably have more muscle mass, but that's not having the same downstream effects on your tendons.
Yeah, and I think, the secondary issue that I do often see with untested powerlifters is they will spend their entire off season on clinical TRT or just above on an athletic HRT dose, and then there's this enormous delta up in total milligram concentration of anabolics when they start a prep. And coincidentally, that's when the injuries pop up. And so, something that I've noticed eventually, and also with my untested lifters, is you really can't and should not run very much. So if your off season is on, let's say, 150 milligrams of testosterone a week, your total milligram concentration for prep maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times that, right? So it's, going to be 300 to 450 milligrams of testosterone, or you can split that between 2 compounds, whatever that ends up being. And there are certain compounds that have positive downstream effects on collagen synthesis. So we know that primobolan can do that. We know that DECA can do that, NPP, which is the shortest form of DECA. But like, I think what a lot of people, because you can take a bunch of steroids and get really strong, they think that that's what you should do.
Yeah.
But in actuality, those are similarly the people who consistently have issues with soft tissue injuries.
Yeah.
And I, through a lot of my career, I had to, I was pretty risky and pretty stupid when I was younger. And I'd do my off season on 400 or 500 milligrams of test, then I'd go to 2 grams of injectables 18 weeks out or 16 weeks out, and then I would tear my quad 14 weeks out, and then I'd be like, I don't know what the fuck happened. It's like,
Yeah.
you just quadrupled the contractile capacity of the tissue and worked on nothing else in the background. Why would you not get hurt? And so, what I've also consistently noticed is, with my more injury-prone lifters, if they're untested, they don't really get to run much in a meet prep, right? They might have double the dose, at most 3 times the dose of their off season, and then that keeps them pretty healthy. And they still get a little bit of a bump from the drugs, but that keeps them pretty healthy. And my coach, Seth, he was kind of the first person that showed me that. He's like, hey, dude, if you build muscle quickly, on anabolics, that also means that you're probably going to be pretty injury prone, which means that you should probably take less anabolics. And this is the least amount I've ever done in my career. My last prep was the least amount I've ever done in a prep. And aside from not knowing how to pull in the kabuki and tearing my hamstring 3 weeks out, it was the best meet I'd had. So it's like, I think because it can work, people think that that's what they should do. And, especially with the high milligram concentrations and these really, really aggressive meet prep protocols, people use it to backfill for a lack of discipline in other areas, right? So their sleep sucks, or their diet sucks, or their stress management sucks, or all of them suck. And then they're just like, well, I'm just going to take a bunch because that's going to make me stronger. And it's like, okay, but when we look at if good diet and good training and good sleep and a little bit of, anabolic steroids will get you to 100% recovery, or you can have terrible first 3 and then the anabolic steroids will get you to 90% recovery, you're also a glass cannon at that point. And then you're going to run into issues long term, just from a health perspective. And then also, I think a lot of people forget too, like there's life after powerlifting. You're gonna have children, you're gonna have a wife, and you dying of a coronary fucking event at 45 or 50 years old, it's like, was it worth it to squat 800 pounds a year earlier? Probably not.
No, 100%. I suppose even in from a fertility point of view, it's not to say that people are going to be shooting blanks, but I think there's just a lot, like you said there, like for a lot of people, there's a life after powerlifting, there's a life after bodybuilding, and I think a decade or 2 decades, or even in some cases 3 decades of uh, you can call it use or abuse, whatever way you want to sell it. It's not a is it, I don't know, I suppose is a risk worth the reward if it is kind of coming a year earlier or a year later in either direction.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to too, is what I've also done with a lot of my untested lifters too, because there's also this very common trend in untested powerlifting where this meet has to be the meet, right? This meet has to be the meet that they make it happen. And so what I've done with a lot of those guys is I'll plan out 18 or 24 months worth of meets for them, because the longer that time horizon is, the less their compulsion to make it happen in this meet.
Yeah,
And then if we can have logical linear progressions every 6 months when you compete for the next 2 years, it's like, hey, listen, in 24 months, God willing, if you don't get hurt, you'll hit the total that you want to. And
yeah,
you can retire, you can do whatever the fuck you want. But if you try to make that total happen at this meet, the risk of injury goes up, your risk aversion goes down, and it's like, okay, and then you might have a serious surgery that might require a year of rehab.
yeah,
And then you have another 2 years to get back to where you're at before you got injured. So it's like, it's almost like this compulsion to make it happen now stops them from achieving the success that they should have. And one of my guys, he's like a freak athlete, right? Like he played college football at Ohio State. His grandfather was in the NFL. His mom's a natural bodybuilding professional, right? Like just like sick genetics. And for him, I had the conversation with him. I was like, hey dude, like you just run too much stuff.
yeah,
And that's why you get hurt. You just take too much. He's like, okay. And so I was like, you gotta backfill that, whatever confidence that amount of anabolic steroids is giving you, you just have to backfill that with actual confidence. You actually just have to believe in yourself. Like
yeah,
you don't need 300 milligrams of tren, you need 300 milligrams of shut the fuck up and just do. And magically, this is the longest run of uninjured training he's had since he started powerlifting in 2019. And with him, we also have that really long time horizon where he knows that he's competing at Ghost, and then he knows he's competing again in December at Kings of the Platform, and then he knows he's competing again after that in June. So he has his next, year and a half worth of meets, almost 2 years of meets picked out. And it's like, yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot less stressful because it's just you just go in, you do your training, you hit reasonable small PRs when your body allows, and if things feel shitty, you shut it down and you move on.
yeah. I think even with that kind of process, I think it gives people like I in drug approaches to competitions. I think people there is an old kind of thought process of throwing the kitchen sink at every competition, and I think you said it there, which is this is the meat, like this is the competition where I'm going to take 2 grams of fucking testosterone, a gram of train, and I'm going to bang 50 anadrol in the morning and 100 before training, and then they try to do that 4 or 5 months later, and they're kind of wondering like, oh, why is my body falling apart on me? And it's not to say that it's solely the drugs, but if you're like you said, if your lifestyle is not conducive to recovering from powerlifting training, you're putting hundreds of kilos on your back every week. It's probably all cumulative, and there is going to be some breakdown, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and I think the secondary thing with that as well is like I work with Dr. Dwayne Jackson, who's the director of nutrition at Prescript, and there are people who are predisposed to certain genetic conditions, right? So he had I'm trying to remember what it was. It was glomerulosclerosis, but essentially like the glomeruli in his kidneys were not properly formed from childhood. So when he went through and actually took anabolics, all of those downstream consequences were far worse, right? And it's like, a lot of these coaches, they don't understand. It's like, you have no idea from looking at someone's blood work if they're going to have an adverse reaction to anabolics. And, probably 80% of my clients are drug tested, 20% are untested. And with that 20% untested, it's very consistent blood work. They're followed by an actual doctor. The doses prescribed are very, very minimal. Their doctor knows exactly what they're doing, because it's like, I don't want to have someone's blood on my hands if I make a risky a risky suggestion, and then they have to have a kidney transplant at 40. It's like, I'm not fucking touching that. But, so many coaches, and it's really, really dark. There are coaches on the untested side who they're okay with having blood on their hands if it means a better resume.
Yeah.
And, you look at, even in the bodybuilding side, how many women did Shelby Starnes kill?
Yeah.
Right? It's like 20, 22. And it's like, do you want to be known as like the doctor of death? Like, is that really how you want your career to go down? And it's like, and it's on the coaching side, it's almost this compulsion to make it happen now.
Yeah.
It's like, I got to make it happen now. I got to have good athletes now.
Yeah.
And it's really, really sad. But in actuality, it's like, dude, the best are going to be the best. If they're a little bit more measured, it might take them a year longer, it might take them a year and a half longer, but they're still going to be the best. And I've been in the back rooms at these big untested meets, and guess what? The best guys don't run nearly as much as you'd expect.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the folly, isn't it? That within the untested side is everyone assumes everyone's taking massive doses. And even in the untested side, sometimes I think they think everyone in the IPF is on drugs as well. And
what? Yeah. Like I literally, like, I made a reel the other day, Shane, I'm sure you saw it, where it's like, you take steroids to get stronger, and then you watch everyone 93 kilos and above at Sheffield out total you. Yeah. It's like, dude, at this point in my career, I don't even think steroids actually help that much. I honestly, like, I see how high level people can compete at Sheffield, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like, I don't think that, like, I think steroids absolutely, you guys had John Jewett on. Look at the size of him. Yeah. Right? Steroids absolutely, undoubtedly, massively improve your ability to put on tissue. I think the causal link between increased anabolic steroid use and definitely an increase in strength, it's a little murkier. And I think in most people, it's probably not going to be super, super helpful. Like, how stupid is it that I had to essentially run like TRT plus in order to actually get back to progressing? It's like, are they just doing more harm than good?
Yeah, 100%. No, I totally agree with you. I think when it probably is quite a humbling watch from the untested side when you're looking at the IPF in Sheffield and you're looking at Jesus do, what did he end up doing, 1170 or 1160?
Something insane.
Oh, well, 11, I think was it just about 11, because his best total was 1152, and then Dan Bell is 1178 or something like that.
Yeah, or 1182. The two deadlifts, yeah.
But it's just, and it's and in actuality, most of my conversations with clients who are looking to get on typically ends up talking them out of it, because I'm like, hey, look, this is a lifetime decision. Like, you're going to need to put a needle in your body 1 to 7 times a week for the rest of your life. And it's going to impact your ability to have children. It's going to impact your ability to travel internationally, because you either need to have an actual prescription, which a lot of people can't get, or travel internationally illegally with drugs. And it's like, do you really, like, is that a route that you really want to go? Are you really willing to, like, go that all in for something that we now know probably doesn't even fucking help that much?
Yeah, as you said, like, the best are always going to be the best, like, drugs or not. Like, I think John Hack is such a good example of somebody who, he was accused of not being natty when he was in the IPF, and then he went on steroids, and, like, he kind of proved the point that he was always going to be a genetic anomaly no matter what. It's just going to enhance what he was. So, like, if you're, like, middle of the pack as a natty, like, powerlifter, you're probably going to be middle of the pack untested too, and you have to decide if is that a risk you want to take. Like, and as you said, like, some of the best guys, they take some of the least. I'm very uneducated in this side of things, by the way, obviously, because I am an idiot of the fuck. But And then what can happen with that kind of person in the kind of middle of the pack? They might just assume, well, I just need to take more because then I get more results. And then they run into the health complications, they run into the injuries, and then they run into the fact that they stop powerlifting after like 2 years. And I suppose that's a big thing that you're kind of touching on. It's like the impatience. And I don't necessarily think impatience is, it's not like limited to like untested, because you see all the time like IPF lifters or whatever, like, you know, you have people creating their fucking villain arcs after having a meet that didn't go well because they didn't hit like their like fucking 500 kilo total. And like yeah, it's, if you think about over 5 to 10 years, you can have your like we had your man Dan Van Den Hook on before. He talked about the increase you can see over time. And like if you're in it for like 10, 15 plus years, gradually kind of doing meets, gradually increasing your total, like you can be far beyond where you think is possible, and certainly far beyond where like the next meet in like this year is going to take you. And like even like with the increase in muscle mass that you can see as a test lifter, you know, it's not going to come out of nowhere either. So it's going to take you like years to develop. So yeah, I think trying to play a long game, and as you mentioned with your own clients, having that timeline of like 18 to 24 months of like, these are all the competitions you can do over the course of like the next 2 years, is super important, because it always keeps you looking at the kind of next target, as opposed to being like placing unnecessary weight on one and then more stretch yourself, and pushing your lows too much, overshooting RPEs, regressing, injuries, all that kind of shit, and then just essentially falling out of love with something that you did once enjoy.
Yeah, and it's like I always tell people like, so a good friend of mine, he was competed at 83, and he had a 520 or a 525 drug tested at 83, and then decides to go the untested route, and goes the untested route, and he goes from like, he would walk around at about 80 or 81, and in one cycle in 12 weeks he went from like 81 kilos to like 93 or 94, and then he came totally off and he stayed at 90. Right, so in 12 weeks, he gained, whatever is 9 kilos of contractile tissue, whatever that ends up being. And he could consistently train with pretty high frequency, pretty high intensity, when he was tested. And then now that he goes tested, he's had pec tear, distal bicep tendon rupture. I just talked to him today. He strained the fuck out of his erector again. He tore his lat in his last prep. He tore his oblique the prep before. And it's like, it's not, in actuality, like he went from tested, 520 or 525 dots to untested 545 dots a couple weight classes up. And it's like, but he's had orthopedic surgery since then, and it's taken him years to even figure out a way to train healthily enough that he can get to a meet prep.
Mm.
And it's like, but people don't want to hear that, right? They're like, well, John Hack, totaled 1,700 pounds, and then John Hack took steroids and had 600 pounds for total, and now he totals 2,300 pounds. It's like,
Yeah.
You're not John Hack.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're not. And it's I think a lot of it, what it comes down to is there's something else that I've noticed in people who have this like compulsion to make it happen, is they also seemingly have the emptiest lives, right? Like they don't have anything else going on, right? It's like, they probably don't have great relationship with their friends. They probably don't have a business or a job that keeps them fulfilled during the day. They probably don't have good relationships with X or Y or Z. And the only thing that they have in their life is powerlifting. And it's like, okay, but guess what? You could get hit by a car walking across the street tomorrow, and you could be paralyzed, and you could never powerlift again. And how sad would your fucking life be if that's all you had? Because now you can't do it. And so it's like, perfect example. I'm going on Sunday to go squat with Dan Bell. You want to talk about someone who does not take powerlifting seriously? Dan Bell. Right? He eats his food, he does his training, he does everything he needs to do to be a good powerlifter, but he does a lot of other stuff with his life, right? He has a full-time job that he loves. He loves riding his motorcycle. We go to the same cigar bar in St. Augustine. And like he does all these other things, and he has a full life, and he has a full friend group, and he enjoys taking time off of training, right? Like when I saw him at the Olympia, like he had told me that he hadn't trained in like 3 or 4 months. He's like, this is great. Just getting out of it, and it's just going around and doing our stuff. And then when he does compete, God love him, he'll have 10 or 15 beers while he's competing. And it's like he does not take it. He does not like. He does everything he needs to be a good powerlifter, but he doesn't turn it into his entire persona. And
Hmm.
I think that's in actuality why he's so fucking good, because there's no stress for him when it comes to training and competing because he loves it. He's like, yeah, this is just a fun thing that I get to do with my friends.
Mm.
And when you make it more than a fun thing that you get to do with your friends, you make it miserable because you're trying to prove to the world that you have worth or value through like the weight that you loaded on a bar, and that's kind of sad.
No, it
Yeah.
is. I definitely see it. I think even for a lot of junior lifters, I think that's what contributes to the burnout of an awful lot of them. Where and like you see, like without sounding like that, do you know that Simpsons meme, like old man yells at cloud, but yeah, like without sounding like Abe Simpson, but like it's really like there's a couple of lifters I have, and they're thereabouts for international selection now with the IPF for the Irish team, but I try really, really hard to pull them back a bit from that because I think when you're that age, you kind of get a bit caught up in the identity of being a power lifter, the I do powerlifting, I am a power lifter. And then it's a very slippery slope to be I am worth my total, I am and even then when you're dealing with um young boys and girls with like weight and body image. Like it's a murky fucking water to try and navigate. But I think where you said it there, like you want it to be about the fun of, and it sounds fucking cringe, but like you do want it to be about the fun of doing it with your friends. You go into the gym, the boys are there. You're maybe not in great form going in, but like you know what, you just fucking you get through your training session. Someone will be there. You have a bit of a laugh with them, and the world is a fucking brighter place after training. Do you know that kind of like that kind of thing? And it's I totally agree with you that like you do look at some people in their like 30s or 40s and you do feel you feel sad and you feel a degree of empathy towards them because it's like you're chasing the it's nearly like they're chasing the dragon and it's a different kind of drug and it's a different kind of feeling they're chasing, but like fuck me, if you haven't set those records by now, it's never going to happen, is it?
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, like, I was lucky enough to like, because I think there's a certain amount of ego death necessary in order to actually like truly be successful in powerlifting.
Yeah.
And like, I had that ego death in 2015 when I finished college football, right? It was like I was playing, best season I've had, get year hold in practice, ended with a traumatic brain injury, and they're like, hey, not only can you never play football again, if you hit your head again, you could fucking die. And I was like, well, this sucks. And then I had to spend, that happened October 2nd, 2015, and I probably wasn't back to form to being able to like feeling like myself until September of 2016. Right?
Yeah.
So almost a year. Because I had to figure out who I was
Yeah.
without this identity sport. Right? So okay, well, I played football from the time that I was 10 years old until the time I was, 2015, I would have been whatever that was, 22. And it's like, okay, I spent 12 years playing something. I spent 12 years giving my entire life to something. And now I don't even get to identify as that because I'm the kid with the busted head. And so I knew that coming into powerlifting, I was like, okay, this has just got to be like something that I do for fun. And then very quickly, because I was good at it, it very quickly became my identity again.
Yeah.
And then, May 2018, I broke my back. And then rehab from that, take almost a year off, come back, tear my left quad. Rehab from that, come back, tear my right quad 4 months later in the same spot. Rehab from that, come back, tear my pec. Rehab from that, come back, went actually nuts. Actually was committed because they were like, "You're insane." And then I was like, "Oh, this could be the end of this identity too." And it's so wild. Like so many people don't realize it's like your identity is hanging on a razor's edge, and you don't even realize. You don't even recognize it. It's like you have nothing else to fill it, and that's you. And guess what? You get into a car accident tomorrow, that's gone. And then you have to confront the very sobering and very upsetting reality that like there's not much depth or breadth to you as a person.
I what kinds of, like, obviously that's you've lived the sporting career of many in a what age you, Stu?
30.
30. So yeah, like you've lived two, like you've competed at a very high level in two different sports. And I suppose maybe I'm kind of interested about maybe the football one, because I think it's one thing that's maybe not spoken about enough or given enough credence in our areas, that we, particularly in the, like, regardless of tested or untested, we have juniors that shoot up to this meteoric level, and then they just crash and burn for various reasons. Maybe it's injury, maybe it's burnout, maybe they're sick of powerlifting, but they leave the sport. So, like, for you, what was that year like? How did you kind of,
Oh,
again?
it was fucking hard. So I was on because it was very complicated because I also had like pretty bad post concussion syndrome. So I had to deal with the post concussion syndrome, and then I had to deal with the fact that I had like no real short term working memory for a couple of months. So it'd be to the point where like I'd get up in the morning and I'd be laying in bed and be like, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go make breakfast. And by the time I walked into the kitchen, I'd forget why I was in the kitchen. And then I'd walk back into my bedroom and be like, I'm hungry. And then I would eventually, after 3 or 4 tries, be able to actually make breakfast. Um, and I had to go to a lot of therapy, and I was on psychiatric medication for almost a year to deal with kind of those thoughts and feelings and emotions. And it was fucking hard. It was really, really hard because I think when the only thing you've identified yourself as gets taken away from you, and the only thing that you felt gave you value is taken away from you, you in many ways do feel worthless.
Mm.
Um, and then like obviously that's insane, right? Like people have intrinsic worth and value regardless of what they can do. And it took me a long time to kind of internalize that and realize that. But that's why when I have younger guys come in, I'm like, dude, this can't be your whole thing. This
Yeah.
cannot be your fucking whole thing, because I made it my whole thing with another sport, and it fucking nearly ended. So I was like, don't do that. Whatever you do, don't do that. And I was like, do it, have fun, progress, do your meets, do 2 or 3 a year, have fun with your friends, consistently train, consistently get better, do all the other things that are going to make your life full and rich, and then you'll have the success that you want.
I'm really curious then about, how did you, like, obviously you've learned from that, like from your 22-year-old self, but how do you at 30 reconcile with that not becoming your identity, without not becoming this unidimensional person? Because I think in our area, like if you do, like Shane and I talk an awful lot about it, you coach, you fucking train in the gym, and then by proxy of that, all of your fucking friends end up lifting, and then they all end up being coaches as well, and then you're just in this fucking, you live in this echo chamber. You go to family gatherings, and it's like, oh, there's that big guy that, like, do you know what I mean? Like it's your whole fucking thing, whether you like it or not. And then, so for you, like how have you, what kind of steps have you taken to prevent that uh overwhelming kind of taking on that identity again?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it came down to like I have, I'm very lucky that I work with Prescript, right? And I teach our barbell course, which Shane thankfully took. And a lot of that is I realized that if I was to have the kind of impact that I wanted, in actuality, me just coaching lifters probably wasn't going to be the way.
Yeah.
So if I can coach coaches, then my net impact is far higher and much more beneficial. So, I did that. I really focused on that. I focused on, business development, right? So, we own Kodiak Barbell. We have 5 coaches that work underneath us. We have 200 and some odd clients in the company. And, we host a meet every year. And so it's like, I'm working on all that stuff. My wife just relicensed here in Florida, and she's getting her clinic up and running. So I'm helping her with all of that. I'm focused on developing and maintaining a relationship with all my friends. I'm focused on making sure that I'm a good husband. And so it's almost like the more spinning plates that I have, if one of them crashes, it's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, I love the fact that I do have a business, and I love the fact that I do coach coaches, because it's like the impact of that is far greater. Right. And it's like, I can set myself up in a position where it's like, if business is going really, really well, like if my wife takes time off, when we have children, she doesn't have to go back. Right. It's like, that's probably the greatest gift that you can give someone, right? It's like, you have actual freedom because I've made that decision. And yeah, it's just like the more stuff I worked on and the more spinning plates I had, the better things were. And I think a lot of guys, right, they think that they need to be super bought in and be all encompassing in powerlifting to be successful in powerlifting. And like, there's something that Seth taught me. And Seth's a great lifter, right? He's totaled at 22 years old or 23 years old, he totaled like 2,500 or 2,600 multiple. And then he
Yeah.
totaled near 2,200 in ramps. The big thing that, he had kind of told me was, he's like, you are going to have this belief initially that you need to sacrifice in all of these other areas in order to be successful in powerlifting. He's like, the opposite is true. He's like, all of these other things, he's like, you need to be a good husband. You need to be a good business partner. You need to be a good coach. You need to be a good, educator. He's like, all of those things need to be dialed in at 100% in order for you to have the support when you need it to be a good powerlifter. And he's like, but if you're just getting rid of those four things for the sake of being a good powerlifter, he's like, you're one, going to be a total cunt to be around, and two, you're going to be fucking miserable. When you're not lifting, you're going to be fucking miserable.
And I think what's kind of funny is that if you think about powerlifting, or you think about, like, I did bodybuilding for, like, to an extremely low level, but I kind of had a little, I won't say identity crisis, but a bit like, oh, I feel like my whole life is revolving around training, because I did my undergrad in strength and conditioning. My PhD is in strength training for older adults, work in gyms, coach, just a generic fucking thing, like. And little of that has actually changed, but I think what I got much better at, and I think that's maybe why powerlifting maybe struck a chord more with me more than bodybuilding in that sense, is that when you're, like you said, spinning the plates of maintaining relationships, friends, going to see, or, like, I don't know about you, but, like, you're obviously, you live in Florida, isn't it? Yeah, so, like, even for you, like if you go home, if you go to Canada, like, if it's an upset in the schedule. So for me, I kind of like thought, oh, if I'm doing this sport, I can't miss a week. I can't miss a weekend of training. But it's probably one of the things that I think powerlifting as a sport really, really gives me, is that, like, it gives me the chance to be flexible enough with my approach that if I need to jig around a training session, or I can have the Christmas dinner or whatever, and it's not to the detriment of me. But I think with sport, I think a lot of people, do you know, this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, like, I mean, like, and your life does, like, to be a good athlete, like, it's no wonder professional athletes compete the way they compete, because they have their really basic needs taken care of. It's like, you're going to get paid. Don't worry about a place to sleep. We got you. Don't worry about food. We'll sort your food. And then, like, their lives are set up in a way so that this little tiny part, they can concentrate on that. And I think that's where uh, a lot of the young people I coach, I'm like, do not do not think that you can make money out of lifting weights, or TikTok, or anything like that. Because if you're a coach, you need to be a very, very good coach to make money. And outside of that, I would definitely tell you, go find a career, go make money, and do powerlifting for your 3 or 4 hours a week after your day job, because it's not a it's not a not to that you want to stamp on anyone's dreams or anything, but, like, I'm sure you have these conversations all the time as well, where you're kind of saying, like, look, there's a lot of shit you need to have in order before this kind of gets, or before your lifestyle is facilitative of everything else.
Well, and it's so funny too. I remember I had this conversation with a buddy literally last week. Is like, professional powerlifting doesn't exist, right? A
No,
professional means that you can live off of your income doing that.
yeah,
Even John Hack, maybe he wins 20 grand a year. Unless you live in Cuba, you can't live off of $20,000 a year, right? So it's like, you may be a successful powerlifter, you may be very good as a powerlifter, but you are not a professional powerlifter.
no,
And people who make money in the sport are people who coach.
yeah,
And so it's like, It's like, do you really want to have your identity be a professional powerlifter? Like, because essentially that's if you have that as your identity, the secondary of that is that you're also broke. So it's like, do you like what the fuck are you like? Do you have shit for brains? Like, it
Yeah.
didn't make any sense to me. And like, I think a lot of people like people who really attach strongly to that, I find failed in other sports, and then they want that to be their identity. And it's like, dude, I have no interest in that, right? Like, I played college football, I played college rugby, I did all these other things. I played sevens. Like, I don't I don't need to do that, right? Like, I do this because it's fun, and it's just it's so crazy that like people consistently make the same mistakes because it's like, dude, like I'm telling you that this doesn't work and you're still doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's one Shane, sorry.
I was gonna say that like, and even with the kind of financial rewards that there is none in powerlifting, like it kind of a logical leap that some people make is like, oh well, if I can't make money off the sport, maybe I can just become a coach. And look, some people are going to be phenomenal coaches, but not all good athletes are going to make good coaches, you know. And then they could run into the issue of just kind of doing people a disservice. And for them, it comes down to the fact that they need to establish like where their values lie, and kind of actually have a hard look at that type of stuff. Because yeah, if you come from a background where maybe you could have been in a sport that would have earned you some money, but then you go to powerlifting, you're still a great athlete there, but you can't get that financial reward, and maybe you're trying to scam people through like shitty coaching and stuff like that. Again, you need to take a step back and like actually kind of sit down and say, okay, where are my values? What can I put what I'm good at into like an actual career that will actually kind of support my hobby, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. Like you mentioned there, Dan Bell has like a regular fucking job. Like he has the biggest total of all time. Like you can have a normal job that you enjoy and do powerlifting alongside. Like it's not mind blowing to think of that. Like
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and it's I think it's I think it just goes back to the identity thing. People want to be seen as successful in the sport, and they're like, well, if I'm a professional powerlifter, that means I'm a successful powerlifter. It's like, or you could just not need so badly for others' approval, right? Like that's another thing that you could do because it's kind of sad. It's like I need to have this be my identity so other people will approve of me. It's like you're a grown man and you're pining for other men's attention and approval. That seems a little weird.
Well, I suppose for the facially endowed among us, there is probably only fans as well that if things go really arse ways, that they could go down that route.
I'm sure Shane sees that all the time because you still train at Pure.
oh yeah, there's plenty of
Oh yeah.
people like that, I'm
Oh
sure.
yeah.
You know.
Oh man, it was funny. So there's a girl that my wife and I know here, and she does like something similar, not as bad, but it's still kind of bad. And I was like, you know that for the rest of your life, people are going to be able to see your asshole at the internet, right? Like it's not like, oh, it's behind a paywall. It's like, no, they just screenshot their phone, dude, and then they look
Yeah.
up your name, and then they'll see that. And I was like, and then the secondary consequence of that is that if you have children, then your children's friends are going to be able to make fun of your child because they'll be like, I saw your mom's butthole on the internet. And
Mm, yeah.
like, dude, you
Yeah,
want to have your
it takes like your mother jokes to like the next level.
Yeah.
dude, yeah, it's like I saw your mom's butthole. Everyone saw your mom's
Actually,
butthole, and
it
it's
actually
like,
did like.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like, dude, it's like every sin demands payment, right? Like every choice has a cost, and it's so crazy to me that we've arrived at a point in human history where people think that this is like a like there's going to be no consequence. Like
Mhm.
there's going to be huge consequence, and you just haven't reaped it yet.
Yeah,
I
like
think.
no, I was gonna say nothing like in life comes that easy without having some like risk at the other side, right? Like it's, but you make that decision as a conscious adult, and if you didn't think of the risks, well then that's your issue.
So weird.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe a good. You mentioned one or two kind of things there, Stu. I think from going back through your page, I think you mentioned something about like CBT
Yeah.
for lifting, and I think this is like, again, if you've if anyone's been exposed to a bit of therapy, which for a lot of the people listening probably will have, I'm assuming, based off of our demographics, the more damaged among us. But yeah, so like CBT, some people will kind of have an abstract kind of understanding of it, but I think maybe you might like maybe give a little bit of like background maybe to what it is, and maybe like how you've used it maybe for lifting, because I think even in my own lifting, or when I'm with clients, I think CBT is a tool for actually maybe not necessarily improving performance, but maybe kind of like managing a lot of like thought processes and stuff around training. I think could be really, really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in my coaching practice, there's two kind of components of CBT that I use. There are unhelpful thinking styles, which is the comment that or the post that I had made a little while ago. The two you see most commonly in powerlifting are catastrophizing and mental filtering. And then the other side of CBT that I oftentimes use in my coaching practice is this kind of three pronged or three tiered thing. That's the foundational tenet of CBT, which is automatic thoughts, which is your initial reaction to a circumstance or initial reaction to a statement. And then underneath that, you have kind of rules and assumptions. And then underpinning those rules and assumptions are governing beliefs. So a good kind of way to think about that is, I tell Shane, hey, you're not strong, right? Shane's automatic response is, oh no, I'm not strong. And then the rule and assumption is, I need to be strong. And then the core belief is, I need to be strong to have value. And so this ends up becoming really, really helpful or really, really beneficial when talking to clients, because essentially all CBT is giving them evidence that the thoughts that they're experiencing may not be congruent with reality. So you say, okay, Shane, are there times in your life where you have had value and worth as a person and you weren't strong? And you're like, well, fuck yeah, like I did a bodybuilding prep and I was really, really depleted and really, really skinny. But I mean, I still had worth and value. Like my girlfriend still liked me and my family still liked me. And it's like, okay, so maybe do you think that automatic thought and that rule and assumption is erroneous? Do we maybe need to revise those? And you're like, well, fuck, I mean, I guess, like, I've just presented you this evidence that you do have worth and value independent of those things. And you're like, okay, fuck, you're right. And then, with the unhelpful thinking styles, the two that we often see in powerlifting is mental filtering, which is focusing on the bad part of an event as opposed to focusing on the whole event. And then catastrophizing is essentially this idea of client has, A experience, and then instead of being like, okay, I'm just going to deal with A, it's A means B means C means D means E means F. And they're like, well, F's going to happen because A happened. It's like, hold on. There's a bunch of letters and a bunch of other intermediaries that also need to occur in order for you to eventually arrive at F. And the chances of that are actually probably really, really small. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I use it in my coaching practice, right? It's like, I'll have a client and they'll be like, let's say they were at the end of prep and they were supposed to hit 290 kilos in their squat, and they hit 280 as their last warm up, and then they went 290 and they failed 3/4 of the way up. And they're like, my whole prep's fucked. And it's like, or you smoked 280 for 2 last week. We were dropping down volume and we were peaking intensity this week. We may just be carrying more fatigue. It doesn't mean that you're not going to hit 290 in prep. And then catastrophizing, right? Which is, oh, well, my whole prep's fucked because I didn't hit 290. It's like, okay, but you can also, there's 4 outcomes that can occur in a powerlifting prep. You can have a good prep, good meet. You can have a bad prep, good meet. You can have a bad prep, bad meet. And then you can have a good prep, bad meet, right? So it's like everything is going to be one of those 4. And if you compete for long enough, you will experience all of those. So it's, and it's, I think a lot of people, there's this concept that Carl Jung came up with over 100 years ago, which is like the unconscious, right? So people they don't know why they react to these sorts of things, and they don't know why they react in these sorts of ways. And, something that Jung had said is that there's no coming to consciousness without pain, right? So in order for them to pull away and deal with these, core beliefs or governing beliefs, or change these rules and assumptions, oftentimes they have to do a little bit of uncomfortable work where it's like, oh, you may have just thought the wrong things or thought things that weren't supported by evidence for most of your life. And that's okay. But now that, the veil is pulled back, you have to do something about it. You have to fix this. And they're like, oh, fuck.
No, I find that there's a certain type of person, especially in that'll come into powerlifting, and that kind of catastrophizing is probably one of the more deleterious aspects of their kind of thought processes, and it's one of the things that I find as people kind of get further into powerlifting and they kind of experience, like you said there, like that was I think that was a pretty common scenario where someone has an expectation from prep. I'm going to hit a 300 kilo deadlift this prep, or or on the platform. So one of the stepping stones to get there is you have to deadlift 290 kilos. We'll say just for example, and they do 290, and it's an all merciful Hail Mary RP11 fucking widowmaker of a deadlift. Fuck. That's the whole plan fucked now. That's everything thrown out. And I think when you do get up into the people being in it, maybe not maybe up at the higher levels, but maybe being further along in their career, and they kind of do experience those. I don't like the way you put it. Good prep, good meat. Bad prep, bad meat. But they do experience that to the point where you can kind of say, ah, I actually have seen this before, and maybe just because I had a couple of bad training sessions or maybe a bad month training, that isn't necessarily going to translate onto the platform. But I think that comes with experience. But I think one of the ways of not preventing, but managing that um, catastrophizing I have with clients is, like you said there, maybe coming from the event out into the macro of maybe the week, the month. It could be, in some cases it could be, okay, how have things been in the last 6 months? You
Mhm.
maybe, and I suppose it's our job as coaches might be and like it can be very very like me like I it's one of the things I really struggled with early on was those soft skills of kind of being able to pull someone, or being able to help to pull someone out of that frame of thought, because like like even as a coach you can be like, oh yeah, fuck, you should have hit that then. Do you know what?
Yeah.
And like it's a skill that I think even when people finish powerlifting, I think it's a skill you'd want to impart on anyone, because it can be a really hard thought trap to try and get out of, that, oh, this happened so the holiday is ruined, or this happened so I don't know, she doesn't love me, or you can fucking throw X or Y or Z into it, but they're all deleterious to someone's life.
Yeah, and it's always funny. Like I tell my clients, I'm like, listen, I'm like, if you can stop catastrophizing and stop mental filtering, and you can get rid of those whatever shitty core governing beliefs, and I was like, you kind of end up a little bit superhuman, and you kind of end up like kind of unkillable, right? Like 3 weeks out of my last meet, I tore my hamstring to the point, like Shane, I'm sure you remember, like my whole fucking hamstring was black and blue, and it was because it was my first rep on a kabuki. So I pulled 300 on my last warm up, and I think I went for 320 for my top set. Pulled it to my knees, boom, hamstring exploded, and I was like, fuck. And then I messaged my coach, and he was like, dude, he's like, I tore my adductor 4 days out from squatting 904, doing like a clinical presentation in school. And he's like, and I still squatted 904. He's like, give yourself a chance to win. And so I had a little bit of a pity party for like 10 minutes. And then I finished my workout. And then I went home. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to be a fucking pussy for the rest of the night. And then tomorrow when I get up, I'm going to stop being a pussy. And so I got up the next morning. I did all my rehab. And he was like, every time you get anxious about your hamstring, do rehab for it. And I was like, okay, I'm anxious 14 times today. I guess I'm doing rehab 14 times. And and then 3 weeks later, I squatted 705, which was, or you squatted 320, which was like 5 kilos off an all-time PR. And then I benched, a 5 kilo all-time PR. And then I ended up pulling a PR, and it ended up being, 7.5 kilos more than I had torn my hamstring. And then after that, I was like, oh, it is mostly your headspace. It is mostly your mindset. You can just choose to not be upset by this.
Yeah. Like at the end of the day, it's all of these things are just information. Like it's us that decide like whether this is like good or bad information. And like I think once you kind of realize that, like, it's so much easier to kind of navigate these like crappy situations. Like even today, I was in their training and my deadlifts felt shit, and like I didn't just like sack off the rest of the session. Like I just continued on. Like I have some good idea as to why they did not go as well, and then the rest of the session was fantastic. I just kind of pushed on. And for some people, if they have a bad meet, they have a failed lift, like they just have a random session that doesn't go well, like that can be like the straw that breaks the camel's back for them. And it's because they don't really have this kind of like mental process of being able to kind of, again, kind of filter out these kind of levels of experiences, right? And just kind of realizing that, yeah, if you have a bad session, well, you can think about like maybe why did that session not go as well? Like, did you push a day previous in training a little bit too hard? Was you sleep off? Are you just not feeling recovered? Like, you can go through all these different things and you say, okay, well, next week I'm going to focus on these aspects a little bit more, and we carry forward. If you miss a lift in prep, maybe okay, I need to kind of watch out when I'm coming up to like my kind of 2 weeks out from the meet, what type of RPEs I'm pushing, how like hard the kind of sessions are leading up to that. Maybe I need to kind of again refine my kind of recovery leading into those weeks. And like if you can go through those processes when you have the kind of good times as well as the bad times, like you can come up with better kind of frameworks for dealing with all of this stuff. And it's not going to be. It's only going to be your last meet if you decide that that's going to be your last meet because you had a shitty meet, and it's only going to be your last session. Like if you decide it's going to be your last session, but unless you are a fucking pussy, you're probably going to do another meet. You're probably going to show up to training again because otherwise, like that is just like you could expect more from yourself if that's the kind of carry on that you'd be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was, funnily enough, that's actually what Seth told me on the way home, because he was like, if you quit, there's no way that you can win. There's no way that you have a chance of having a good meet. And he's like, so give yourself a chance to win, and the only way you give yourself a chance to win is you don't quit. And I was like, oh fuck. And I was like, yeah, I guess you just don't quit. And like a good friend of mine, his name's Andrew Clayton. He's 2-time 105 kilo world's strongest man, and he is like undoubtedly the best axle presser in American history at 105 and super heavyweight. Like no one else is even close. And he injured himself very seriously probably 3 years ago. And he went to, at the time, break the American axle record. And when he shifted back onto his back leg to lock out, he ended up tearing his ACL, MCL, partially tore his patellar tendon, and he needed a full knee reconstruction. And he was like, fuck. And then at that point, he came up with the slogan, which was never, never quit. And so he came back from that, and they like his right knee's fucked, or his left knee's fucked, right? Like still can't fully straighten the leg. They fucked up the surgery. Like it's not good. And they were like, hey, you might just not be able to, do it. Like your knee is just a functional limitation, and we fucked up the surgery, so we're sorry. He's like, no, like I'm not accepting that. Like the only way that I can lose is if I quit. And so when he was going through his rehab, this is how unhinged he is, which is why I love him so much. He decided to break the 24-hour ski erg world record. And so ski erg, you're usually standing, and he did it seated because he couldn't stand up because he had a cast on. And so he broke the 24-hour ski erg world record. And then he goes and he's like, well, I'm just going to do a bodybuilding show. And he goes and like does a bodybuilding show, diets down from 300 pounds to 230 pounds on stage, and fucking looks sick. And then he comes back, and with 4 months of training, wins OSG and becomes 105 kilo world's strongest man again 5 years after the first time he did it. And then so I was like, oh, it's mental. So much of this is mental. And so like and he has these shirts that say never, never quit. And so when I had that hamstring, I was like, okay, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit. And I didn't. And I fucking set a total PR.
I think I suppose like where it is one of the like, and like again, like it sounds funny to say, but it is kind of when you're looking at those types of people who come back from catastrophic injuries that would have written off or like other people, it does almost like when you, like, I suppose when you think of what you might have had in a torn hamstring, you were like, this is small fish in comparison. Yeah. And like, I suppose it is kind of having that comparison can be the thief of joy in a lot of situations, but I think in some cases it can really bring you just back down to earth and kind of give you clarity to your situation as well. Um, I've had injuries, and you're kind of going like, oh, why me? Why the fuck is this going on? But like at the same time, you're like, I'm still like bar not being able to lift the weight I want to lift. I have no functional limitations at all. I'm doing pretty okay. Like, yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah, I think those stories they show you the resiliency that you can build, and like again, you always hear of people who, maybe they have like one leg and they decide to do bodybuilding. Like there's a guy called the Bionic Body. I don't know if you've seen him, and like he competed at the New York Pro or something like that last year, in classic physique. Looked unbelievable. He had fucking massive quads, but he had nothing below his knees. Like he literally had like stilts on, you know? And like I think when you see people, I don't know, maybe they pull out in prep because they have a little bit of tendonitis in like their forearms or something like that. And it's just like, come on, man. Like, surely you're more strong-willed than that. Like, if there are people out here suffering with, all of these different things, like, I think the kind of biggest thing that brought home for me, and I'm sure you guys have read it, is like, Man's Search for Meaning. Like, it's a very classic book. Think about a Holocaust survivor. And like, yeah, I think if you read something like that, before there was anybody such as like David Goggins knocking around, and then you think about the kind of little kind of pity party you're maybe throwing yourself because you misgrooves a bench press or something like that. Like, come on.
Yeah. Well, and it's so I remember when I was in school, I always had I don't know if you guys have them in Ireland, but it's called Sports Illustrated. It's like a magazine.
Yeah.
And so I always had a Sports Illustrated subscription when I was in high school. And at the Vancouver Winter Olympics in 2010, there was this story of, it was a Russian cross-country skier. And in the semifinals, she had a bad accident. And she ended up finishing the race, but she'd had a bad accident, qualified for the finals. And they take her in for imaging, and they're like, oh, she has a punctured lung. And because she had broken a bunch of ribs. And then her coach asked the doctor, he's like, hey, like, is she going to die? And he's like, no. She's like, she's just going to be in immense pain, and we need to sort this out. But if we sort this out tomorrow versus today, like, it's fine.
Yeah.
And so the coach was like, hey, you just bruised your ribs. You're fine. You're just like, we're at the Olympics. We trained 4 years for this. You need to do this. And she's like, okay. And she fucking goes, and she skis the best race of her entire career. She wins a silver medal at the Olympics, and then collapses at the finish line, and then they rush her into surgery. And she was fine after the fact, but it was like, so much of our capacity as human beings is our belief or lack of belief in ourselves. And it's like, if someone can come second at the Olympics with a punctured lung, like, you fucking got some elbow pain on your bench, you'll be all right.
Definitely. Shane, was there anything else you kind of wanted to go over with Stuart?
No, I think that was perfect. I think we covered a lot of really good topics there, like a little bit about the the specificity argument, as well as a lot about longevity. So yeah, I think this would be a really good discussion that I think a lot of people take a lot from.
Yeah, brilliant, Stuart. I really appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much. Do you want to tell people where they can find you online, tell them about Kodiak Barbell, tell them what you're doing?
Sure. Yep. So you can find me on Instagram. It's Stu_Kodiak Barbell. I think I have a Threads account that I post to intermittently, but it's more so like schizo rambling, so it's probably not that important. And then KodiakBarbell.com. We have 5 powerlifting coaches that can help you out. Yeah. And we're hosting a meet April 13th in Victoria. So if anyone's local to Canada and wants to compete at a sweet meet in downtown Victoria, shoot me a message.
Really
awesome.
Sweet. Thanks so much.
Perfect. I'll link everything in the show notes. And if you did enjoy the podcast, make sure to give Stu a follow on all of his links, as well as make sure to leave us a rating and review on the podcast platform you're listening on. And we will catch you in the next one.